All right, so welcome back here. We are going to be moving on to Module 9, the Roman Empire and Early Christianity. And in this lesson, we're really going to be looking at how Rome moves from a republic to an empire. Now, in previous lessons, we've seen how the Roman Republic, and you can see Rome is right there on the map, has grown from simply controlling the city of Rome itself to having basically dominating the Mediterranean. And this was really in large part because of the Punic War. So most of the territory here on this map in pink was a lot of territory that they had won during the course of the Punic Wars. But also we know that the people like Pompey were going off and getting territory, and that Julius Caesar was off going, getting territory and campaigning as well and bringing territory into Rome that way. So by the time we get to the death of Caesar in 44 BCE, or BC, we know that Rome has built a territorial empire. But what we're going to be looking at the rest of this section here is we're going to be looking at how, not simply does Rome go from having a territorial empire, but how it builds a governmental empire as well. And basically here, what we mean is that Rome is going to move from the practice of sharing power, which is the theme of the Republic, to concentrating power into the hands of single individuals. Now, after Caesar dies, his assassins expect that they're going to be hailed as heroes, having saved the Republic from a man who took the title of dictator for life. However, this is not the case. The people of Rome are quite upset that Julius Caesar's dead, because while he's alive, he may not have been sharing power with them, but he was creating public works projects for them to have employment at. He was giving them, free and reduced cost of distribution of grain. Julius Caesar actually left money to the citizenry of Rome in his will. So they kind of viewed Julius Caesar as someone who was helping them and were quite upset when he was killed. And this provided an opening for the second triumvirate to rise to power. Remember, triumvirate means rule of three. And the three men who come together to rule Rome after Julius Caesar's death were, first of all, Mark Antony, who was one of Caesar's best friends. Also, Caesar's relative, Octavian. So Julius Caesar was Octavian's great uncle. Caesar doesn't have any Roman children of his own. So, he did have a child with Cleopatra in Egypt, but that child was not eligible to inherit. So Julius Caesar makes Octavian his adopted, he adopts him and makes him his main heir. So Octavian joins this group, and then finally one of Caesar's friends, a man by the name of Lepidus. So together, these three individuals take control of Rome, and one of their first acts is to start going after and tracking down all the individuals who were part of this conspiracy to assassinate Julius Caesar. So they start to wage war against those assassins, and one by one they either kill them in battle or out of some, some creed, I guess, of some kind, they don't want to be taken alive, and give them the thrill of being able to assassinate, so they commit suicide. So either way, they eliminate all those members who had participated in the death of Caesar. And this meant that there's going to be nobody there to challenge their rules, so the three of them together, they decide to split up the Roman territory between themselves so that each would have a portion to administer. And we can kind of get a sense of their relationship in the distribution of territory. So we see that Octavian gets this area here in green, which includes the western part of Roman territory. He gets the city of Rome itself. But he also gets this rather poor and certainly, unruly territories to the further west, which have a lot of Germanic tribes living in it. So he gets the prestige, but not much money. Then we have Mark Antony, and you see Antony gets a much bigger portion of territory in blue here. And not only that, he gets Greece and Egypt, and that's where all the money is. And so that's his area to rule. And then you notice here what poor Lepidus gets. He gets basically North Africa. And you can see how Lepidus is sort of the third wheel, if you will, in this relationship. And he's just kind of bringing up the rear, and he's not getting much out of this deal as the other two. And it kind of lets us see the uneven power dynamics. Then you're going to try and, you have the idea of banding together, but these three are really able to kind of circumvent the will of the Senate if they needed to. But they don't actually all get along with each other, which is why it's dividing up the territory so that they're not stepping on each other's toes. And even if it's not foolproof, for instance, we know that when there's a rebellion in Sicily, and notice Sicily is part of Octavian's territory, that Lepidus actually sent in soldiers to try and crush the rebellion, and this, of course, made Octavian very upset because Lepidus was trying to hone in on his territory, right? And so we know that Octavian went to Lepidus and essentially encouraged him to retire, so Lepidus would end up leaving the Second Triumvirate, and this meant that all we had left were simply Mark Antony and Octavian. Now, neither of them, both of them, there was lots of tension in that relationship because both of them were really vying to be master of all the Roman territory. And so this is going to set us up for a showdown between Mark Antony and Octavian. But as we noticed on the previous slide, Mark Antony, part of his Roman territory was in the east, including Egypt. And when Mark Antony goes to visit Egypt, he ends up meeting the lovely Queen Cleopatra. And the two of them start to engage in an affair, and Mark Antony and Cleopatra end up having several children together. And you can see an image of Cleopatra on the papyrus scroll there. What's kind of interesting is that while we call her the Egyptian queen, certainly she was queen of Egypt, but she was, descended from the Hellenistic kings and queens of Egypt. So she's actually Greek in ethnicity, not really full-blooded Egyptian. We also have an image there of Mark Antony, so you can see a picture here of his statue, and you can go online and kind of see these famous historical statues, and then they kind of use a computer program to colorize them and get a good look at what maybe this guy looked like. But this is what Mark Antony may have looked like, and as close of a likeness as we can get. But in effect, they get together, and this provides an opening for Octavian. He's able to make the claim that Mark Antony is really not being a good Roman. And Mark Antony is sort of contaminating himself with foreigners, and Octavian starts spreading rumors about Mark Antony back in Rome, and that he can't really be trusted, and that he's becoming more Egyptian than he is Roman. And keep in mind, really what's at the heart of this conflict is both Mark Antony and Octavian want power. And of course, things are going to get complicated because at that time, Mark Antony's having an affair with Cleopatra, and he's already married to Octavian's sister. So there's probably a little tension there too, where Octavian's a little bit upset that Mark Antony's, stepping out on his sister. But in any effect, this really starts causing tensions to rise to a point that there's going to be a civil war in Rome, and this is going to be between Mark Antony and Octavian. The most famous battle of that civil war between Mark Antony and Octavian was a naval battle called the Battle of Actium in 43 B.C. You can see that Octavian had boxed in Mark Antony's forces there in purple. And when the battle begins, Mark Antony has his battle plan. He's going to break through Octavian's lines. They're going to be able to do this. In fact, Queen Cleopatra's ships are some of the first that break through the lines. But when this happens, instead of turning around and hitting Mark Antony's forces from behind and then kind of, catching them in a pincer move, instead, Cleopatra just starts heading away from battle. If we look at this map here, it's like she leaves the battle and she starts sailing back to Egypt. And when Mark Antony sees that Cleopatra's ships are leaving, he follows suit. He also kind of breaks through and just starts following Cleopatra back to Egypt. And when the rest of his troops kind of notice, wait, where's Mark Antony? Where did he go? They lose heart. They surrender to Octavian. Octavian's able to win the Battle of Actium, and he chases after Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And when he gets to Egypt, there's some minor engagements and skirmishes, but Antony and Cleopatra realize they can't defeat the forces of Octavian. They both decide to commit suicide instead of being captured, and they allow themselves to be bitten by an Egyptian asp, or what we know as a black mamba, supposedly. And with the death of Mark Antony, Octavian really doesn't have anyone left to stand up against him. He's able to return to Rome in triumph, and we see that he will become the first Roman emperor because really there isn't anyone left alive to oppose him. When Octavian returns to Rome, he proclaims that he has now liberated Rome from the evil influences of Mark Antony in the Senate. And in gratitude, the Senate gives Octavian a new title, the title of Augustus, which means divinely favored. And so from this point forward, we kind of do a name change for Octavian. We stop calling him Octavian, we start calling him Caesar Augustus. And really oftentimes, we just abbreviate and just call him Augustus, even though that's not technically his name, it's his title. But when you say Augustus, you need to know you're talking about Octavian, and he becomes the first Roman emperor. Now, Augustus is credited with starting what we call the Pax Romana. or the Roman peace. And this is because he ends the civil wars that have been plaguing Rome. So, as we mentioned, after defeating Mark Antony, there really isn't anyone else who's powerful enough to challenge Caesar Augustus. And not only that, but Caesar Augustus is going to control the military. And so that's going to help him ensure peace and prevent civil war from breaking out in Rome again. And this would be very critical, not just for Roman history, but also for Christian history as well. As we'll see that, Jesus is born during the time of the Pax Romana. Now, Augustus has no intention of sharing power. He may have said that, he's come back to, preserve the Republic from the evil influences of Mark Antony, and he really has no intention of going back to the time where the Republic is really focused on sharing power between the Senate and the Roman people. At the same time, though, Caesar Augustus remembers what happened when his great-uncle Julius attempted to, in a way, become the kind of king of the Republic. And again, Caesar says, I'm no king, but certainly takes the title of dictator for life, right? And Caesar was kind of implying that he was going to become king. So Augustus wants power. He doesn't want to appear king-like, so he goes in a very different direction than his great-uncle had. And so what he does is he creates a government style that historians have called the Principate. And that's because of the title that he takes. He takes the title Prince Princeps Key. So basically, which is Latin, but and what this title means is first citizen. And the first citizen was a person in the Senate who got to vote first. And usually it was given to the most respected member of the Senate. So this is, an honorific title, but it doesn't really contain any major power. It has more moral authority than political authority. But it is a title that's commonly used during the time of the Republic. So it feeds into Caesar Augustus a strategy on how to build a Roman Empire. And that he is going to pretend that he has not built a Roman Empire, but that the Republic is still functioning. And so by using titles like Principe and what he's doing is creating this illusion that the Republic is still functioning. And so, if anyone comes to and says, well, I'm just the first citizen. But what he does with this title is he doesn't just give it moral authority, he gives it political authority as well, because he said, I'm the first citizen, but by the way, I do have powers of tribune for life. And if you recall, the main power of the tribune is that they have the power of veto over the Senate. So by doing this, what he's saying is, I'm the leader of the Senate, and oh, by the way, if the other senators were to do something I really don't like, I just overrule them. Well, if you aren't actually giving power to the Senate, and what you're really doing is keeping it for yourself, well, you don't really have a republic, but we're still pretend that it does. There's still going to be elections for consul during the time of Caesar Augustus, but the consuls don't have any real political power anymore. All of that power is in the hands of Caesar Augustus. And one of the main reasons for this is because he controls the military. He also controls the treasury. So when it comes to the military, if you recall from, talking about the decline of the Roman Republic, one of the main problems that contributes to the decline of the Republic is that politicians were building, kind of client armies that were loyal to their military commanders more than they were to the Roman government. Well, Caesar Augustus puts a stop to that. He ends the practice of client armies and instead makes the military a professional force. And by this, I mean that the soldiers would not be paid by their military commanders, but rather from the government treasury, which again, Augustus controls. So Augustus uses the treasury money to pay the soldiers. And as they get coins, of course, all the coins have Augustus's face on it. So it's really like he's the one who's paying him. So one could argue that the client armies don't actually end. It just almost like everybody in the Roman military is part of Augustus's own client army. And so this, of course, goes back to the foundational principle of Roman politics, the patron-client system. And in that system, patrons provided basic financial and career and legal assistance to their clients, and in return, the main job of the clients was to give the patron political support. And so what Augustus is doing here with the military is through paying them in a way, he is becoming their patron, requiring the military to support him politically. He's also, though rather intelligent, to realize that if he has a lot of military commanders around who do have command of soldiers that would be, that could possibly rebel against him, and he makes those people very happy, then they won't rebel. The second thing he does with the military, after making them professionalized force, is that he sends them out to the border regions so they can expand the borders of Rome. This is going to be beneficial politically, but also economically for Rome, because every time they expand, they get spoils of war. It keeps the military commanders out of his hair, and then to make sure that he can maintain law and order in the city of Rome, since he sent the military elsewhere, he creates a new group of soldiers known as the Praetorian Guard. And their main job is going to be to protect the emperor. So they are Augustus's personal bodyguard, but they are also, an elite military force. It's considered to be a great honor to be part of the Praetorian Guard. And they can be dispersed into the city to keep law and order in the city if need be. So if you want to make a modern day analogy, you can think of the Praetorian Guard as a cross between like the Secret Service and the National Guard. They kind of function in that way in Rome. And by controlling the military, controlling the treasury, Augustus really has concentrated all the power into his person. But again, he's going to create the illusion that the republic is still functioning so that nobody will accuse him of being king, even though he really is one. Now, finally, Augustus will try to make the creation of the Roman Empire acceptable to the people by taking the patron-client system and expanding it to all of Rome. So he, like Julius Caesar, starts public works projects. He's going to start expanding the road networks, building great buildings. He puts people to work so they have money, they have income. It benefits Rome by making it a beautiful city. His claim is that, I came from Rome, founded a city of bricks, and I left it a city of marble. He's kind of boasting about his great public works and projects. He also continues that practice of distributing free and reduced cost grain to people. And that's going to be something that keeps him fairly popular in Rome. And then lastly, he's providing a lot of public entertainment for people. The gladiatorial games are one such example. And some of these games get very elaborate. At one point, Augustus has ordered that one of the theater areas be flooded, and he stages a recreation of a naval battle for the people to come out and watch. And so with these great kinds of entertainment that are available, it's another way that he's kind of becoming the patron of the people. And again, the idea is he becomes their patron so they remain politically loyal to him. So for ordinary people, yes, if you're an ordinary citizen, you may have lost your ability to really vote and have your vote do anything, but one could argue that they really didn't have that much power even before Augustus created the empire. So really, when it comes to losing a lot of political liberties, it's only the elite for the most part that are actually suffering from that. And it's one of the main reasons why the vast majority of people are going to find that the creation of the empire perfectly acceptable. It's much less chaotic than the time of the Republic, and many people are going to get the benefits that Augustus is actually offering. So, looking at all this, what have we learned? Well, hopefully we've seen how Caesar Augustus preserved some of the institutions of the Roman Republic. We still have a Senate, we still have assemblies, we still have the consuls and other positions within the Roman government, and they're still there. It's just that they don't have any real power anymore. But he's doing this, he's keeping this illusion of the Roman Republic as a means to disguise the fact that he's actually created a Roman empire. And he's basically king. And he's pretending that he's not one. And a lot of people buy into this pretense because they see the benefit that it brings them. There aren't civil wars during his reign, which we'll talk about our next lesson, how life is pretty good in Rome during the time of the early Roman Empire. But there are little problems with the creation of the Roman Empire, and that has to do with the fact that anytime you centralize power into a single individual, then your political stability depends heavily upon that person's leadership qualities. So when you get someone like Caesar Augustus who's in charge of the government, things really work really, really well. But if you get some people becoming emperor that aren't quite as good at leading, then life is not going to be quite as great, and we'll see how that really happens in our next lesson about the empire.